We acknowledge this land that we meet on today is the traditional lands for the Kaurna people and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge that the Kaurna people are the custodians of the Adelaide region and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. We also pay respects to the cultural authority of Aboriginal people visiting or attending from other areas of South Australia and Australia present here. And I will just reiterate my handy tip, which is if you are trying to work from one screen, the first bit, as my webinars usually are, I'm going to be showing you a few things. But then the second half of this webinar is completely hands-on. We're going to get into creating our own test class team so we can test out some of the features, so that if you haven't used class teams before, you can give them a go before you test them on your own students. So keep that in mind when we get to that bit of the session. And so without further ado, I will stop sharing this presentation and we'll jump straight into Teams, hopefully. I do have Lynn, my colleague, here on the call today as well, so she will be helping to monitor the chat. So if you do have questions, you can also pop them in the chat. Or as I said, because we're a very small group, you're welcome to come off mute as well. Now, before we do get into class teams, I'm just going to very, very briefly take us into a browser so that I can just clarify the ways that you can access Teams if you don't have the desktop app installed on your computer. So the first way you can get to all the Microsoft apps is through the EdPass portal website, which you can log into using your @school's email address. And once you get in here, if you scroll down, you can click on the Microsoft 365 portal tile, and that gives you access to all the Microsoft apps, and the most popular apps are also tiles in here. Another way is if you go straight to www.microsoft365.com, that will take you to the Microsoft homepage. And again, you can log in using your @school's email address, and then you can access all your apps. And then the third way, if you're using Edge as a browser, Microsoft have now put in a nice handy shortcut in the right-hand menu. And if I click on that Microsoft logo, I can access my apps and also documents that I've recently accessed as well. Before we dive into Teams, I'm going to briefly mention a couple of apps. We're not going to open them or look at them. I'm just pointing them out because some of these work really well with class Teams. So if you're new to Microsoft 365 and you want to dive into class Teams, it's also worth having a bit of an explore of some of these apps as well. So to get to all the apps from this homepage, we click on the apps in the left menu, and then we click on the all apps across here. And then I've got access to all those apps. Outlook, I'm going to point out, because if you happen to be running online webinars or sessions with your class, you can set those up through your Outlook or through Teams. OneDrive is your online cloud storage space. This is where we put our Me files, but I might be working on files in here that are for my class, and after I've made them look really specky, I'm going to move them from my OneDrive into my class Teams. Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, here we go, are all online versions of those desktop apps that you probably have installed on your computer. And again, they all work really well within class Teams. One that you might not have heard of unless you've come to some of my other sessions so far this year is Sway. and Sway is an online presentation tool. And again, Sway is a great way to give students information from inside your class team or get your students creating in Sway. And Forms as well is, if you've ever used something like SurveyMonkey or Google Forms, Forms is Microsoft's version of a survey or quiz tool. And again, it works really well with class teams. And in fact, when we look at assignments, you'll see that Forms is built into assignments as well. Okay, so after that very brief introduction to, or just spotlight on some of those apps, we are going to delve into class teams itself. For this webinar, we're going to be using the new Teams. So if your Teams look slightly different, it might be that you're using the old Teams. And even though I could use the desktop version of Teams, the web version of Teams, I'm going to use the desktop version because it's got a few more capabilities that the web version doesn't have. So this is the desktop version of Teams. If you've been used to using the old Teams and you're seeing the new Teams for the first time or very recently, you'll notice there's a few changes. Instead of all our teams being grouped together in one chunk, Microsoft has now very handily for us teachers moved our class teams up the top, and then the normal teams or staff teams or PLC teams come down here. And today, of course, we're going to be looking at these class teams. Now, before we dive into actually creating a team and playing around with the features, I'm just going to show you a demo team that I've already set up so that I can talk to some of these features before we go and set our own one up. So I'm just going into this one. So this is an example of a secondary team, but it would be very similar for a primary school team as well. And because it's a class team, it's got some pre-built features. So we've got these sections here, which you won't see in a normal team, that are specific to class teams. So the first one is the home page. Now this is a SharePoint page that you as a teacher can adapt to your class. So you can edit any of this to make it suit your class, to welcome your students. And students can't edit that. So you can see here, because I'm the teacher in this team, I've got that edit button, but that won't be visible for students. The next section here is the class notebook section. Now you do not have to use this section with your class, but if you are a OneNote person, Class Teams has a special OneNote attached to it called a class notebook, with some very special sections in here, and these allow you to do some collaboration, meaning that everyone in the team can go in and edit these sections. Also, there's this section called the content library, and this one here is only editable by teachers, which means you can put all your resources that you'd like students to access in here for them to access and easily navigate through. And then the last section that's special to a class team and a class notebook is the teacher only section. Now this is only visible for teachers. So if you've got co-teachers, they can see this section as well. And this is where I do all my planning. And then you'll see down here, there's some names of some people. So these are actually students in this class. And when I add a student, their name pops up. They can access the files in this folder. So they can go in and create things in here. This student obviously hasn't been following the instructions. And I can see it as a teacher and they can access it, but none of the other students have access to this folder. Okay, classwork. Oh gosh, I'm going to jump into another team. Sorry, I'm just going to jump into this one now. So classwork is a relatively, let's try another one. Classwork is a relatively new section of class teams, and what this allows us to do is it allows us to group resources together in one place for easy access for students. So I can add some instructions, I can add some resources, and in this case I've also added an assignment, which means students can easily click and access these without having to navigate through different file structures. And I can also add some instructions as to what these are actually being used for. Assignments is also a fantastic feature in class teams because this allows me to create an assignment and mark it and view it all in the one place. And I can view all my students' work in one place as well. So that is a great feature that we'll be diving into a little bit later. And then if you do use assignments, we've got the grades section as well, where we can mark in when people have, if we need to give people a mark. Reflect is a tool to help you do a quick pulse check on students' wellbeing. So it's a built-in tool to class teams, and if you create a new check-in, for example, there's some pre-built questions, or you can write your own question, and the students get that question. They can do a quick image. If they want to, they can add in an extra adjective and submit. And then as a teacher, I'd see everyone's pulse check on how they're feeling. And then the last section in here is called Insights. Now, Insights gives us some analytics around the team. Now, again, this is a test team, so it doesn't give me very good analytics. But if this was a proper team, I'd see which of my students have been active in the team, which would mean that if Joan hadn't checked into this team for over a week, I might need to have a conversation with Joan around what her blockages are in accessing the work, because you'd hope that the students would be accessing it. You can also get a quick view on assignments and reflections and what files students are accessing and things like that. So that's really helpful. And then we've got our channels, just like a normal team. So we've got our general channel, which is always generated by teams when you create a team. And then you've got the possibility to add more channels down here. Okay, let's now get hands-on and let's create our own team. So can you just give me a quick thumbs up, either a virtual one? I can see no one's got their camera on, so maybe a virtual one, or just type in the chat when you got Teams up so that you can follow it along with me while we create a test team to have a bit of a play around, and we look at some of the features of that team as well. If you can just give me a thumbs up or a message in the chat, that would be great, and then we can move on. Amanda, you're welcome too. Because we are doing some playing, you might want to delete some of the bits, but you're welcome to use one that you've already made. That's fine. Okay, perfect. Let's get going. So if you're creating one for a bit of a play, you click on the Join or Create Team button. Now, if you're using the old teams, this will look slightly different. We're going to click on Create Team, and then you get the option of 4 different teams. Because we're doing this team to work with students, we're going to choose class. I will just point out here as well, if you're using class teams year on, or from semester to semester, you do have the option to create a team from another team that already exists, that you're an owner of. It doesn't copy all the content across, but it does copy the file structure in that channel section across. So that's useful to know if you're wanting a similar structure for your team each year. But we're just going to go from a template and click on class. It will confirm you want this template, so let's click on use this template. And again, if you're using the old teams, this will look slightly different. And then we want to give our team a name. Now, we do have some suggestions and recommendations around how you name your teams. Because there might be 500 Miss N Year 4 classes in the state, in the department, if I write Miss N Year 4 in there and then accidentally delete that team, it's going to be very hard for the service desk to find that right team. So we do recommend that you start the team name with your school code, your 4-digit school code, and then you can go ahead and write Mrs. N. And then we also recommend that you put the year, because then if you are using class teams the next year, you won't get confused around which class is which if you're teaching the same year level the next year. And then we can click on create. Now, there is currently a bit of a bug in new teams with adding students. So if you aren't able to add students when you're creating the team, I'm going to show you how you can get students to add themselves. There is a little bit of a workaround as well, in that you can switch to the old teams if you're using the new teams, and then you should be able to add students as well. But I'll show you how to generate a team code a little bit later, and that might be a good workaround until Microsoft fixes this issue. So, but for this team, so that we've got some kind of students in the team, what I might get you to add is a trusted colleague who won't mind a team popping up. So Shenna, you might want to add David, and David, you might want to add Shenna. Amanda, you're welcome to add Lynn or myself. Just remember to delete the team after as well. So I'm going to add John, because he's my team teacher. And then before I click add, I want to choose whether they're a teacher or a student. So anyone in the team who's a member automatically comes in as a student. If this is a co-teacher, I want them to come in as an owner. But for this demonstration, I'm going to keep John as a student. It doesn't matter if you're a teacher. If you've been added as a member, you'll come up in this team as a student, which is why if you are working with a colleague, it does give you a bit of an idea of what students can see if they add you to a test team. So let's click add. And then there's my brand new team. Now, there's a few things in here that we want to make sure are set up correctly before we go anywhere near adding students or letting students know they can use the team. So if we go up here to the 3 dots and go to manage team, this is where we can go in and do some settings or change some settings. While we're in the members tab, if you do want to add people manually after, you can add them from this by clicking on add member and then putting in their email address. And if you have made a mistake, so say John is my co-teacher, I can change him to an owner in here, or vice versa. If you've actually added a student as an owner by mistake, you can change them to a member as well. But what I really like you to do is go into the settings, because in here we're going to have a look at the default settings and make a decision around whether we want to change them. So Amanda, if you've created this team to use with your students, it'd be great if you can have a look at these settings. So if you go to member permissions, this is what the default is. And there's a couple of settings we recommend you change when you're working with students. especially when you're in that phase of establishing trust and class routines and class norms with your students. So we've got owners can delete all messages, which is great. That means we can. But you might want to untick the give members the option to delete their messages and give members the option to edit their messages. Now, the reason why we suggest that you untick these two is that if I was a student and I wrote a message and that message wasn't very nice, someone read it, was offended, and then I just went and deleted it, myself as a teacher, I won't be able to see what that message said and if it existed. Same with editing. If I allow my students to edit it, they could write something nasty and then edit it, and I wouldn't be able to verify whether the student who's reported it was telling the truth or not. So if you untick those, that means that students can't delete or edit their messages. Now, when I did this demonstration last week, unticking the edit messages for members also applied to owners. I think that might be a bug because normally it's just members. So we'll see today whether we have to go in and change that if we need to edit. But hopefully it's a bug and hopefully Microsoft has fixed it. Okay, the other thing in here is the team code. Now, there's several ways you can add students, as I alluded to earlier. You can either add them through typing in their email address, and you should need to put in their full email address the first time. They won't pop up in the system. But you can also do this thing called generate team code. Now, what this does is it creates a code, and a student can go into Teams. Instead of clicking on that create team, they can click on join team, enter this code, and then they're automatically in your team. That saves you in that you don't need to type in their email addresses or copy and paste them in. There's this lovely full screen option here. So first day when I want my students to join, I can put that up on the board and get them all to enter that code in, and then they'll join my team. A word of caution and a recommendation is that after you've got your students to join, you do either remove the code or reset the code, because when you use this code to allow students to join the team, you don't actually get a notification to tell you who's joined the team. So you can imagine some students writing the code down and passing it to a friend in another class, and suddenly you've got 40 students in your class when you should only have 30. So we do suggest that you reset that. Also, another option, if you've got TRTs, like yourself, Amanda, coming into the school and you need to give them access to your class team, you should probably only need to give them access as a student so that they can see the files and folders and work within the team. So you could, after you've reset it, put this code into your TRT notes, and then TRT teachers could join the team temporarily. And then when you're back, you can obviously kick them out of the team. So that's an option as well. Fun stuff. If you're finding your students are getting a bit too or spending too much time adding memes and stickers and whatnot to replies, you can disable those as well. So if you need to, you can change those settings. While we're in the settings, I'm just going to click back into the members, because there's another handy feature of a class team that can be quite useful to know about in case you get those chatty students that reply to your posts with 10 hi, hello, howdy messages and clog up the team with messages that aren't important. So for students who are called members, you've got this nice mute option. So I can choose to mute everyone in my class, or if it's just John that's not being respectful of the class norms, I can mute him as well. So that's handy to know about. One thing to mention, if you haven't used class Teams or Teams with your students before, you cannot chat with students, and in class Teams, students can't start a post. They can only reply to posts. So if you do want to use class Teams as a way to get that kind of chat feel happening on posts, you as a teacher will need to start that post off. Okay, I've gone through the team navigation and let's have a look at the channels more in depth. So class Teams has generated this general channel, and you can see there when I hover over it, it's a standard channel. That means that everyone in the team can access this channel and see everything that I post in here. If, for example, I wanted to a place for an SSO and an NEP student to have their work and their conversations, what I can create is something called a private channel. So I'm going to go to those three dots up the top, and hopefully you can follow along with me. And I'm going to click on Add Channel. Now, when I create channels, it's at this stage that I need to make the deliberate choice between making it a standard channel everyone can see or a private channel. So I'm just going to create this one with my NEP student, Tom. I might put in a description. And then I'm going to choose my channel type. So this one I'm going to make private because I just want Tom and my SSO Cindy and myself as a teacher to be able to access this channel. So I've made that decision. I can't change it once I press the create. So I'm going to press create now. And I can add the students. Now Tom isn't in my team yet, so I'm just on, and neither is Cindy. So I'm just going to skip that stage. And I'm just going to go back and refresh that team. And then you'll see here, I've got that channel with my padlock showing that it's private. Now at the moment, because it's just me in there and no one else who opens this team, so if John opened this team, they wouldn't see that private channel exist. So it's only if you're a member of that channel that you actually see appear in the panel over here. So that's quite handy because it means that no one's saying, well, what's this special channel with Tom's name on it, for example. So that's private channels. Also, if I click in here, you'll notice that we've got files in here and notes, and in general, we've got files as well. So whenever I create a channel, we've got a file structure that belongs to that channel. Okay, why have I got channels? What can I use them for? So there's several reasons why you might have channels in a team. If you're using channels to organize your student material and let the students know what's happening, you could use something like posts, and you could have channels for all your subject areas down here. So let's start a post. Now, when I start a post, this is very similar to when you use chat. You can add a subject if you'd like. You don't have to. I am in this case, and I'm going to call this week 1 spelling. And then we can type in our message. Now, I do have, oh, it hasn't picked up a spelling mistake. It should pick up spelling mistakes. So you do have some limited formatting in here. You can highlight words, you can change the font color, and you can change the look and feel of it as well. You can put in bullet points, tables, and things like that as well. Down here, we got this post type symbol, and that allows us to change it from a post that looks like this into an announcement. And this is really handy as a teacher because what I can do is if I've got announcements for spelling or announcements for maths or announcements around assignments and coursework, for example, I can go in here and go to the settings, and I could choose a color that every week the students know that if it's a pink heading, that's going to be spelling. So you can help the students organise and see what's what by using visual clues. Also, these settings up the top is really important as well. So I mentioned before, students can't start their own posts. They can only reply to posts. But say I don't want students to be able to reply to this post because it's about spelling words. We've gone through them in class. I know that they won't have any questions about that. I can turn off replies in here by clicking New and Moderators. Now, moderators in this case means owners in that team, so that would be your co-teachers. Another really handy thing in here, especially if you're a specialist teacher or if you're a high school teacher that teaches across multiple classes, or even a primary teacher that teaches across multiple classes as well, you've got this multiple channels option. Now, this allows me to use this same post in multiple teams if I'm an owner in that team. So I can click on the plus. I can choose another class where I want to post that. So say it's this, that's where I am at the moment. Say it's this team, this other year 4 team. I can select that, oh, it's to do with spelling. Let's put it in this channel and update. And now this same post is going to be in 2 teams. I don't have to do any copy and pasting. So if I click post now, and I'll go back into that other team. And in that spelling channel, there's that post there. So again, that's a really handy time saver if you're needing to do the same post in multiple teams. Just go back into that one that we just created though. And yep, so I can see that I don't have a pen here, so I can't edit that. So if you do make a post and you do need to do some editing, you will have to go into the 3 dots, into Manage Team, into Settings, Member Permissions, tick that Edit. Then you can go back into General and edit the message. Post it again, and then I would advise you to go back into Settings, back to Manage Team, back to Settings, and untick that one again. So hopefully Microsoft fixes that bug sooner rather than later. Okay, so we've talked about posts. The next thing we're going to have a look at is our file structure. And again, class teams are quite special in that they've got a special file structure in the back end as well. So if I click on files here, and I'll give it a moment to load, it's generated this folder here called Class Materials. Now, Class Materials is a special folder that allows you to add documents. So if I click in here and grab a document, and any documents that you add into Class Materials, students can access to view and download, that they can't edit. So it's really important if you have something like a task sheet that has the instructions and things like word counts and whatnot, that you put them into the Class Materials folder so that students don't edit them and you don't find that you've put a word count of 200 words and it's been edited to 50 by some delightful angel. So again, make sure if you're adding files to your team you put them in class materials. So I'll just show you again how I added a file. I can, if I've got my File Explorer, just click and drag it in. It should pop into that folder. If it hasn't gone in the right place, I should be able to move it. No, I can't. So I'm actually going to delete this one and go into the class materials folder itself. And now I'm going to click and drag that one in. I can also use that upload button up here, so I can upload files or folders directly within Teams. Or if I want to, I can create a new document directly within Teams as well. But remember, anything in this class materials folder is viewable and downloadable by students, but they can't edit it. If I do put it outside of that folder, so say it's this one here, for example, or this one here, let's put a Word document in here. So if I do drop it outside there, students can go in and edit it. So if you are wanting students to collaborate as a whole class on a document, it's perfectly fine to put it in the general channel here, or any other channel will have that same file structure. Any questions so far? No? Okay, please do feel free to type in the chat or come off mute if you do have some questions. Okay, so we're now going to have a look at something that's really exciting that came out halfway through last year, but Microsoft have just made some major improvements to it, and that's this thing called Classwork. So Classwork allows you to organize your files like I showed you earlier at the beginning of this session. And we're just going to create one so that we can see what it looks like. So in the Classwork section in the left menu, down the bottom, you've got this Add Module button. So if I click on there, if I've already created them in previous classes, I can reuse, or I can click on New Module. You'll notice here it's got a big draft tag, which is great. That means that I can write it, create it, add my resources, and students won't see it until I publish it. So I'm just going to give this one a title. I'm going to add in some description. Oops. And again, I've got some limited formatting in here, in that I can change my font colors, make things bold, etc. Now, when I've added a title, I don't have to add a description, but as soon as I've added a title, I can click on the Save button here. And then you'll see this is still a draft, but I've now got some extra things that I can do. So I can add resources, I can publish straight away, or I've got this plus button. Now, because you might not have some files ready to drop in, I'll just show you that you can drop them in. So let's just drag and drop. But if you don't have the files ready to go, if you click that plus button there, you can do a new file. So let's just do a new Word document and call it Spelling Words. And click done. If I want to go in and edit that one, I can open it in Word or open it in Word Online and edit that as well for students. And I can add as many files as I'd like to this resource. If it's a file that already exists, I can upload from the device. If it's something that lives in my OneDrive, I can access it here as well, or Teams as well. Note that in order to for students to access these files, they're quite hidden in the back end, in the SharePoint end of the team. So if you did want students to be able to access this outside of the classwork, it might be a good idea to put a copy of the files in that class materials folder as well. Okay, so I've got two things in here. I'm also, actually, I'm just going to press publish now and confirm. And then I might go in and edit it and add an assignment as well. But before I do, I'm going to create the assignment in assignments first. So I can do it from here, from scratch, but you can also add assignments from the assignment tab. So that's classwork. Let's go into assignments and we'll quickly create an example assignment as well. I am doing a webinar on class Teams assignments because it's a lot of, there's lots of features to explore in this, but we'll just create a basic one for today. So in assignments, I can click on create and we're just going to do a new one. Again, if you've got existing assignments from previous teams or you've been added to a team by a co-teacher, you can use assignments that they've created as well. You can do from existing. New quiz is that connection to Microsoft Forms. So I did mention earlier that some of those M365 apps work really nicely in class teams. Forms and assignments is one of those links that works brilliantly together. But we're just going to click on new assignment. And then again, I need to enter a title, so spelling test, enter in some instructions. And if I wanted to, I could attach, again, a document. If I get time, I talk about bidding progress, but you can attach a file, or if you want to do one from scratch, you can click on new. Let's click attach a new Word document. And click done. When you do attach documents, the default is that students can't edit that. So if you want the students to write in this document, for example, and to be able to see their work as they're going along, not wait until they hand it in, just change that to students edit their own copy, and then each student will have a copy that Teams generates. We can set some due dates in here. The default is always the next day. Let's leave that for today and add a rubric if you want to as well, but we'll skip that today. And then one feature to mention is that I can change it from all students to individual students or groups of students. So if I do have those NEP students that I want to assign a different assignment to, I can create assignments and just assign them to individual students as well. So let's keep it like that, very basic. And if I click on assign, that now comes up and students will be able to see that. And when I click in here, I can see that student there. If they've looked at it, I can see that they've looked to it and I can give them feedback and mark it as well. Back in classwork, we just go into that module that we created by clicking. And if we go to those three dots there, we can edit the module. So if we go in there, we can now, hopefully, oh, maybe it won't let me. Sorry, the plus sign. We can now add that assignment. So add from this class. There's that spelling test, attach. So we can add that assignment to that classwork and it's still published. So students will now see that that assignment is part of that group of work that I've created the module for. Okay, so I'm not going to delve into Class Notebook. I did give you a brief explanation of the different parts of the class notebook. But that is a whole another beast as well. So again, we do run sessions on class notebook. But I will, because I think I've just got enough time, talk about something called reading progress. Amanda, are you a secondary or a primary teacher?
I'm higher education, vocational education training, so 11 and 12.
11 and 12. Do you deal with students, for example, that might have English as a second language or low literacy?
No, because they actually have to have low literacy a little bit, but they have to pass the Asani LLN tests to get into the course. So a bit of dyslexia this year, but that's about it.
Okay, so reading progress might not be exciting for you, but it might be something that you could talk to your colleagues if they're specialist language teachers, for example. It's got a really good place in high school for that. Or if there's any SLE classes, it would work with them as well. Or even if you've got those lower level literacy students that are really struggling, reading progress is a great tool for those. So hopefully you'll still get something out of this last little bit. So reading progress is in assignments. And before I show you how to create one, I'm just going to jump into another class and show you an example that my son did, so you get a bit of an idea about what I'm talking about. So let's go into assignments and past due and returned. Okay. So reading progress, once we close all these down, a reading progress, what it basically does is it allows the teacher to upload a text, or there are some pre-generated texts as well, into class Teams. It gets the student to read that text. So this here is a video of the student reading that text, and then it uses AI to work out the things that a teacher would normally have to tick and write initials up the top of a reading record, for example, to test. Now, it's not going to replace any of that sitting down and marking kind of analytics, but it is very helpful. So straight away, it gives you some scores. You can listen, and if the computer has made a mistake, you can change that, and you'll see all the data changed. You can also change the accent. So if you are dealing with students that don't have English as a first language, you can change how picky the computer is as well. You've got a nice expression report here as well. So it's telling me that the student paused a bit too long or didn't do the full stop in these places or read too fast as well. What's really powerful is that if you give this reading text to all the students in your class, it will actually pick out the words that students in general missed. And so it will give you some nice analytics around what words your whole class might need to practice as well. You can do it in other languages, which is why it might be a powerful tool for your teachers that might be teaching a second language or a foreign language to students as well. So that's really exciting. Now, there is something that's coming up soon for class reading progress, and I actually have a preview version in this team. So I am going to actually create the assignment in this team, and yours is going to look a little bit different, but there is a AI generated text now, which will look at the words that your students have missed and create another text for you with those words so your students can concentrate on doing those or improving themselves. And it will also generate some quiz questions for that reading comprehension as well. So let's see how you do it. again, yours will look slightly different, but I do want to show you what's coming up, and hopefully these features will be released for everyone soon. So in assignments, yours won't have as many as mine does, but if you click on the create again and a new assignment, put in a heading. So and then reading progress is hidden under the attach bit. So if I click on attach, I've got this reading progress in here. Now you will have import Word or PDF or browse sample library. So just click in there. So here you've got a whole range of text that you can just use straight away. Now note, because Microsoft's parent organization is in the United States, some of these are quite American in flavour. You can see American government, the branches of, but there are still some texts that are quite useful for our students. You'll notice also that it uses Lexile. So if you're a school that doesn't use Lexile, you might need to do some conversion. And they do have a range of texts, non-fiction, fiction, secondary, and K-6. I'm going to show you the new feature though, which is the generate reading passage. So this is what I'm talking about. It's looked at the previous reading progresses that I've set my students. I can choose a topic. So let's go geography. I can choose an age of my students, the word length. Let's keep it at 100 to 200. Change it to Australian English. That's okay. And then I can generate that passage as well. So here, what it's done is it's created some text. It's a brand new piece of text. It's got those words that came out of the analytics from previous readings that my students had done, and I can make it more complex or less complex as well. I can go in and edit it as well. And then I can use that passage. Again, you won't see this feature, but this is a really exciting feature as well. Or you'll see that, but you won't see the generate questions. So this links automatically to forms, so you'll be able to add your own questions. But again, this feature is coming very soon, where you can get it to AI generate questions, how many you'd like, and then it will create a form for you with those questions once it decides to stop thinking. Okay, so again, very America orientated with the passage, but you get the idea that this could be a really powerful tool which creates something specifically for your students. And then when I click next, it's got that in here. It's got everything bundled. I click on assign, and then let's see where it is. There we go, reading progress example. And if I went into my Joan Clark, I can't see it, but if I go into here, hopefully I can see it and take action in the student. This is what the student will see, and they'll be able to access it in here, and they'll be able to record themselves. Okay, so we've just about run out of time. I'm just going to finish off today by showing you a few more resources that you can access to further your learning. So we always like to point you in the direction of some further resources you can access. So the first one is the Microsoft Learn Educator Centre, and I'll just pop that link into the chat. And in here, there's access to all sorts of learning paths to help you get a better understanding of the Microsoft apps. If I go browse all educator training, I can put in, for example, class teams, I'm struggling with my keyboard today, aren't I? And then it's given me a whole lot of modules and learning paths, which are specific for educators around using class teams. Our team has a YouTube channel, and I'll pop that in. We've got a playlist as well, which is around class teams. You'll notice that these ones here are webinar recordings, so they're quite long, but there's lots of short ones in here as well to help you set up your class team and set up assignments, etc. So that's worth looking at as well. And then the last place you can go to for help, if you need it, is we have a M365 apps and support and collaboration team. And there isn't a class notebook channel, but there is a Teams channel where you can put in questions if you've got things that you're not sure about in class teams. So again, thank you very much for joining us today.